Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the time you're watching this at. This presentation is about two important projects that led to the establishment of the first Museum Registrars Department in Egypt, the Egyptian Museum Registrar Training Project and the Egyptian Museum Database Project. With funds from the Egyptian Antiquities Conservation Project through the United States Agency for International Development, the American Research Center in Egypt started the Registrars Training Project in January 2007, and it was scheduled to run to June 2011. This was in parallel with the Egyptian Museum Database Project, funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and the purpose was to establish a fully functioning department responsible for documenting and managing the collections of the Egyptian Museum using a state-of-the-art collections management database. The Registration, Collections Management and Documentation Department became official in July 2007 with 4 registrars and 3 trainers. The project director was Dr. Janice Cameron, who's currently working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the responsibilities of the heads were, there were 2 heads, and the responsibilities were divided between myself, I was head of documentation, and Dr. Hanan Geber was head of collections management. Today, the department consists of 4 registrars led by 1 head, Dr. Marwa Abdelrazik, on the right. I worked in the department until 2015, and back then, the total number of records in the Egyptian Museum database was 166,100. And the total number of fully cross-checked records in the database was 9,729. The total number of approved records in the database was 1,752, and I will explain what all this means in a bit. The registrars were fully trained through the Registrars Training Project, and they were the ones who created the department's protocol book with their trainers. The protocol book is the manual that details all the tasks that the registrars are responsible for and how they should be performed. As I said, there were 2 heads. The department was headed by 2 heads, head of documentation and head of collections management. So what were the tasks under documentation? Mainly, the tasks were accessioning, maintaining complete and accurate object records, both in the museum register book and the database, and object files. The accessioning, here you can see Amina al-Baroudi, she's holding the clipboard, and she was the accessioning registrar. She was accessioning, here she's accessioning an object that entered the collection of the Egyptian Museum and became part of Section 8, the basement section. The Egyptian Museum is divided into 8 sections. And each section has a curator in charge. And to Amina's left, there is Ms. Sabah Abdelrazik, who back then was the curator in charge of Section 8, but is now the director of the Egyptian Museum. So Amina, once an object comes into the museum to be accessioned, she accompanies the curator in charge of the section that the object would be accessioned into with an accessioning checklist and an accessioning form. So here is the accessioning checklist, which contains a number of boxes that she's supposed to tick off to make sure that all the tasks have been completed. And this is the accessioning form. So Amina would assign the object section number and write the name of the curator in charge, the date of accessioning, the special register number, which is the register specific to that section, and a JE or Journal d'Entrée number, which is the main register book of the Egyptian Museum, in which all the objects of the Egyptian Museum are registered, and the Catalogue Général, which is another type of register book, but is basically, it's technically a publication. So it divides the objects into types. So I could go and ask for permission to publish a Catalogue Général of all the New Kingdom statuary in the museum, for example. Then she would write the title of the object, and the title is supposed to be as descriptive as possible, and then a description of the object, the materials, the dimensions, the dating, the provenance, the manner of acquisition, bequeathed, confiscated, excavated, exchanged, given, or repatriated, and 2 lines of, the excavation information, other source of information, the home location, which is where the object would live, and the current location where it is right now. So, for example, if the object was received in the director's office, that would be the current location, and would be, how would stay there for a night, for example. That would be the current location, and the home location is where it's supposed to end up or stay. And then the section head would sign, and then as soon as all this information is entered into the database, Amina would add the date and her name. Yes, and of course, all this should be added to the Journal d'Entrée, the main register book, and the curator in charge would add all this information in the special register. So this is a page of the Journal d'Entrée of the Egyptian Museum, and then the page would, after it's completed, it would be signed by the museum director. So the Egyptian Museum has 4 basic numbering systems. It's pretty complicated. There's the Journal d'Entrée, as I said, and the Catalogue Général, and there's the temporary registers. So if an object entered the museum and we weren't sure if, well, this actually existed long before the department was established, but if an object entered the museum and was going to stay in storage for a while before it left to maybe another museum, we weren't sure, it would be assigned a temporary register number. And then I already explained what a special register is. The database, which was established through the database project, it actually was begun in 2005 using FileMaker Pro software. But then in 2009, the database was migrated into KEEMU, which is a very, very good museum software, but very expensive. So the database, of course, all the information should be, everything entered into the database should be based on accurate object information. We followed a very careful system of cross-checks. So as I said, there were 4 overlapping numbering systems, and we had to check all the entries in the different register books and note any discrepancies. Also, there are certain publications and websites that we had to also consult. And we had to check the actual objects in the museum. So if there were discrepancies in the material, for example, each register book says that a statue is made out of a different material. We would go and check the object ourselves. If the material was not very obvious, we would ask a conservator. The database modules, these are the different database modules. We did not use all of them, but there were some, for example, the events module, we used it to track scholar requests and loans and exhibitions, which I will talk about in a bit. The object records, there's the catalog module, and this is what it looks like. This is the summary page that includes, all the basic information about the object, the title, the category or type of object, the ID numbers are all listed, and dating details. And a photograph, of course. And then the title ID tab, which contains the same information, the excavation number. Object rating, of course, as I said, when we started using the software, there were certain tabs or fields that we had to figure out if they would be useful to us and how we would use them. So for object rating, we would say either display, on loan, or exhibition. And there were other things that I can't remember right now. Here's the category details. So this says accessory or regalia, scepter, and subcategory 2 is heka or crook. And then we used the requests here, these buttons to track which museums, which of the 3 main museums, the Egyptian Museum, the Grand Egyptian Museum, or the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization had requested the object, because often more than one museum would request the same object. So this was a useful way to figure out if there were any overlaps. And here is the accessioning information that contains, the acquisition method, acquisition date, the name of the excavator, the source, the sponsor, the registration date, and then the source summary. So this says excavated by Howard Carter for Lord Carnarvon in 1922, and then there's the source details. So you have the region, the area, the site, the monument, and the feature. And for dating details, we have New Kingdom Dynasty 18, Tutankhamun, and the absolute dates. And for newly excavated objects that entered into the museum collection, if we did not have all the source details, for example, if we just had the region and area and site, we would contact the excavator to try and get all the information, because if we didn't get it then, we would never be able to get it. And physical contains the dimensions. We had to enter three dimensions, measurement notes, the materials, and when a record is complete, we have a description as well. Multimedia contains all the photographs of the object and photographs of the pages in the register book. And sometimes we would add very relevant articles. And here, the recorder, this is where we tracked who did what in the database. And so the first step was record creation, and the last one was record approval. So once the record is approved, that means that all the process has been completed and that the record has been checked and approved. Location, here is where we enter the location information, and in movement history, we can track the movement of the object through the years. References, here's where we enter the references in which the object is mentioned and published. And associations is, for example, all objects are parents, but if you have a coffin, for example, or a box that has pieces that couldn't be separated, the lid and the box would be the children, so that if the lid is taken to conservation, we can enter a different location in the database. And here's where we enter notes. So, and these are the pages from the register books. Parent, child, and family records. I already explained what parent-child means. Family records is when you have more than one object that are closely related to each other. So here we have a naos and a statue that were found together. So the family record is both objects, and the children are the statue and the naos. So in the family record, we enter in the ID number fields, we enter all the ID numbers. I'll try to speed up in the interest of time, but here you can see the description of the object. And in the physical tab, when we enter notes, this is where we enter all the discrepancies and all the problems. So the discrepancies, for example, if one register book says something and another register book says something completely different, we enter this information. We say that this register book says this, the other register book says that, and the correct information is this, because either we found this in a publication and we cite the publication, or we ask an expert in this type of statue or object or time period. And this is the multimedia tab with the different images, the different pages in the register book, and even pages of publication. And again, here is the recorder information. And the location, of course, here, because it's the family record, so you have more than one object, we have various, because the different object could be in different places. And again, the references. Object files, everything that's entered into once a record is approved, what we do is we print out a catalog card. And the database has the capability of generating different types of reports. So this is the catalog card report. We print it out and then we add it to the object file. So each object has a file that contains all the relevant documents to this object and the catalog card. Because we wanted to have both, we wanted to have a manual system as well as the database. And of course, the database is backed up both on-site and off-site. Collections management. So these are the different components of collections management. So we had gallery inventory, gallery maps, object movement, traveling loans, in-house exhibitions, and outside requests. So these are the registrars doing their gallery inventory. So they would go out to the gallery with an object inventory or gallery inventory sheet, and they would look at the object, find the object in the gallery, enter its ID numbers and its location, and take a photograph of or more of the object. When conducting a gallery inventory, they also took with them a gallery map, and these maps were produced by the department. So that's how they use these maps to enter the location of the object. So as you can see, all these letters divide the architecture in the gallery so that they can identify exactly where the object is located in the gallery. And that's the location tab. This says from SR. So the location code is, we say either it's from the code is either that we know the location from actual gallery inventory, or in this case, it's from the register book, from the special register book, and the object has still not been inventoried. Traveling loans, the department also was very much involved in the traveling loans. So if an object was traveling for an exhibition abroad, the department was responsible for tracking the process and producing these lists of objects with complete information and photographs that were sent to the organizers of the exhibition. And this is what the kind of information that they entered into the database. And as you can see, it says loan direction, outgoing, loan status, unpacked, returned. Here's the list of objects. In-house exhibitions, the process was very similar. So for loans, we would give the loan a loan number, which is L, year, and serial number. For in-house exhibitions, it was E, year number, and serial number. And here is also the objects tab, where they entered all the list of objects. And of course, the exhibition registrar attended all the movements of the objects to the gallery where the exhibition would be taking place, and would take photographs of the mounting of the exhibition and the opening of the exhibition. And all this would be entered into the multimedia section of the record. Outside requests, of course, also the department was responsible for providing researchers with scholars who wanted to publish objects from the Egyptian Museum with information and photographs of these objects. And that's us in the galleries, collecting information for the requester. And that's the request form that the requester had to fill out with, these are two different versions of the form, because the form was changed more than once. And that's also, we created a record for the outside request. And then the event number that we would give was OR, outside request, year and serial number. And we would also track the process so that we would know, what has been done and what hasn't been done. And there was also a way to search if the request was completed or not. And of course, we operated on a first come, first serve basis. And this is the report, the outside request report that we generated from the database. We also gave researchers and museum staff the opportunity to use the intranet version of the database, which is more like a website that they could search. So here's the mask of Tutankhamun. Of course, the department was very, very, very useful, very important when the museum played a very important role when the museum was looted in 2011. So here you can see what the showcase is broken, and that there's a commando to the right of the photograph. I was a member of the committee that entered the museum after the looting. So there was a committee that included curators, conservators, someone from the Registration, Collections, Management and Documentation department, and I was the one who entered on the first day. And we were accompanied by commandos, so we couldn't move very freely around the museum. And we had to try to assess the damage. We took photographs and we assisted the curators in inventorying the objects in their sections and figuring out what was missing. And then they sent us reports of what they found missing. And we produced lists in the database of the missing objects. And we constantly updated these lists when objects were retrieved. And it was our department that generated reports that went with the photographs and dimensions and all the relevant information about the missing objects that went to all the authorities, the Egyptian police, the Interpol, the International Council of Museums, and all the relevant authorities. So this is what a report of one of the missing objects looked like. We also played a very important role in producing the ICOM's emergency red list of Egyptian cultural objects at risk, because a lot of the images of objects, ancient Egyptian artifacts that represented objects that were popular in the antiquities market came from the Egyptian Museum database, and we also helped translate it into Arabic. Following the revolution, the department faced many challenges because the RC project ended very abruptly. So the management was not properly handed over because the trainers were still the ones who knew the back end of the database. So it took us some time to figure things out. There was also lack of funding because the project was funded by RC. So since the project ended abruptly, it was very challenging for the museum, and the database support fee, unfortunately, is very expensive. Also, the IT support we had was also through the RC project. So we had no IT support. And unfortunately, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities does not have enough IT staff. So these are the main challenges that are being faced by the department. And the current challenges are that the support fee is still too expensive, and the department needs a more sustainable solution. So either the database, either the museum finds a different software that's cheaper, but is still very good to migrate to, or maybe they can hold discussions with the software company and come up with some kind of offer. There's still a lack of proper IT support due to the shortage in trained IT staff. So these are the current challenges, and I hope that the museum manages to overcome them. Thank you for listening.